You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. The Winnipeg Baroque Festival comes to a close Saturday with a performance of Bach's longest and most musically complex motet, Jesu meine Freude, with more Bach and music of Handel also on the program, sung by Canzona under the direction of Kathleen Allan, who has joined me in studio. Good to see you, Kathleen.
Great to be here.
Welcome back to Winnipeg.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back.
So this, not only the conclusion of the 2023 WBF, but also the culmination of the Canzona season, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's been a wild few years. And this season we've actually managed to have more or less a normal concert series.
A normal concert series. And you're welcoming some very special guests to close things out with a bang. Members of the WSO joining you for this, right?
Yeah, it's so great to be back with them. We've had a partnership over many, many years.
So can we talk a little bit about the idea behind this program? Because it's one being offered in tribute, right?
Yeah, that's right. The program was actually initially conceived right at the height of the pandemic. I remember this April 2020 grant deadline where everybody was wondering, what are we proposing? What is the world going to look like? Yeah. Is this thing even going to be possible? So I was developing all of this programming, and it just felt right to do something that would feel healing. Now it's 2 years later than we planned to be doing that program, and we still need healing, and probably even more so with everything that's going on in the world. So Handel's work for the death of Queen Caroline, funeral anthem for Queen Caroline, is so moving and really rarely performed. This is my first time performing the work. I think it's a first in Canzona's history. And it is so personal, but yet grand at the same time, which I think is fitting for lots of things that we're feeling right now. Big problems, but really individual feelings.
I do want to chat more about that, and I definitely want to chat more about the Bach. But one last kind of thought on this initiative. You're also really going to be extending an invite, right, to those who might be needing a particular comfort most right now, too. Can you speak to that?
We are offering free tickets to newcomers and refugees. So if you are new to Winnipeg, and we'll let you self-define whatever that means, the tickets are freely available on our site. So you just sign up for that ticket type and come and enjoy the music. I hope that it's about 90 minutes, that we can leave our problems at the door and just sit together and experience this beautiful music for a moment.
A wonderful initiative, and I hope people will help spread the word. Maybe they're listening to this conversation right now and thinking like, oh, I know a newcomer family, someone who might be wanting to take this concert in. So yes, please take in this show. So let's chat about what audiences are going to be hearing. Before we get to the Handel, I want to talk about the two Bach motets. Beginning with the lesser known O Jesu Christ meines Lebenslicht, BWV 118. A work that's sort of like difficult to categorize, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's the only motet, if we can even call it that has existing individual instrument parts. In fact, in two different versions, very likely composed for a funeral, like many of the other motets. And the first version had trombones. Both versions feature this instrument called a litui, which was likely something similar to a cornetto. We have oboists playing those parts. It's a little bit low for the oboes, but it really works, and it'll be singing and reedy and almost brassy in that kind of resonant sound. So it's highly unusual. It's through composed. It's about 11 minutes long. There's 2 verses, and it's at once sort of harkens back to the Renaissance and the way the polyphony kind of fits together, but also has this romantic feeling. I don't know if you heard in the rehearsal, Simon. You got to visit us last night, and it was the harmonies, the way that the phrases develop over these long shapes is both sort of ancient and very contemporary.
There's also a sort of solemnity to the music, and almost this like procession-like quality. And I imagine that would also harken back to this idea of it being a funereal work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But then the strings confuse that because they probably wouldn't have been processing with cellos. So it's really an enigma, but embedded in that mystery is just this incredible beauty and peace. Like it really acknowledges loss, but it has this contemplative and meditative reflection and sort of at peace quality to the whole piece.
Yeah, it certainly does. One other thing that kind of I do want to touch on is the fact that this is, as I said, one of those works that has sort of defied categorization. You called it an enigma, and it has something to do with, we think, the amount of instruments that are involved in this work. Because originally, when it was put into the Bach catalog, it was referenced as a cantata. We now call it a motet. Just for anybody listening who's thinking, okay, they're using some music terms. Can you parse that difference for us, Kathleen? I know that's easier said than done, but the differences between cantatas and motets.
Oh my gosh, that's a hard question, Simon. Motets generally are colla parte, which means all of the instruments play the same notes that the choir is singing. So you hear this sort of cohesive, homophonic, or at least unison sound between, for example, the first violins would play along with the sopranos. So in terms of Bach's output, that's how we would define a motet. No existing separate instrument parts. But this one, you look at the score and it says, oboe 1, oboe 2, trombone 1, trombone 2, violin 1, and they're all playing totally different parts from what the choir is singing, which is more like Bach's cantata output, where he wrote all the instrumental parts. We have existing parts in his handwriting that show that he really meant for them to be playing different things at the same time. So I don't know if he was experimenting or how he might have categorized this work, but it makes it really interesting to study.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And it's one of those that I really haven't heard before. And I wonder if that confusion is maybe part of the reason why we don't hear it all too often.
Yeah.
But it is one of those that it's going to be really striking, I think, for the listeners. Now, one of two motets on the program. The other, certainly better known, Jesu meine Freude, BWV 227. Like we were talking about earlier, another motet that was written for a funeral. Though I have to say, if you didn't know it was written for a funeral, when it comes to Bach, he just communicates such joy and such compassion and such humanity in this quote unquote sad music, doesn't he?
That's for me, Simon. The music of Bach is that exact dichotomy, and he was such a person of faith. He found such joy in knowing about sacrifice and suffering and redemption. And for him, it was all wrapped up into one package. So you hear these minor chords, but with these like sparkling voicings and the way that the orchestration supports the vocal timbres, there's so much light embedded in the way that he writes about such sad things.
Yeah, it's also a very meaty motet. There's a lot to grab hold of, both for audience chorister and I'd imagine for conductor too, just in terms of like the textures and the length and the complexity of it all, right?
It is so complex. So another feature of this particular motet is that most of it is in 5 parts. Okay. So it is doubled in the orchestra, but we have soprano 1, soprano 2, alto, tenor, bass instead of our usual 4-part texture. So he really flexes his fugal writing when you have a 5-part fugue that somehow fits together into a beautiful whole, while each part is really complex unto itself. So that's been our challenge in rehearsal. How do we not just make it sound like a big mesh, but rather build a little bit of texture, foreground, middle ground, background? Who has the most important part here? That's usually led by the text or who's singing the main subject of the fugue. The hardest thing to do is to lean back when you're singing these really fast and complex lines. Actually, you're not the most important thing at the moment, so let's step back into the texture and let the tenor shine for a moment, or whatever the case may be. So that's the fun of rehearsing this music.
And that fugue comes right in the middle of this like symmetrical overall structure of Jesu meine Freude, which just, I guess, kind of further highlights Bach's brilliance because it just feels so balanced too.
It's a real tour de force. It sort of wraps up his genius, I think, in this work. It has this symmetrical structure, as you mentioned, the key relationships between the whole, from one movement to the next. And if you look at sort of a big picture chart of the whole motet, it looks like this rainbow, this arc that's perfectly balanced. But even on the micro level, you have the balance within the movements. And I think that goes back to his faith and his connection to the text. There's a lot of dichotomy in the text and in this piece between the spirit and the body. And you'll hear movements that have no bass line. And it's just this trio of upper voices that paint this really sort of, I want to say Geist, because it sort of sounds like ghost in English, but it's the word for spirit.
Angelic quality almost.
And it's ethereal, And so we're trying to highlight that by doing the whole movement pianissimo, actually, sottovoce, really ethereal. And then the basses come back in and we get this trots, and there's quite bodily suffering, very earthly kind of feelings and sentiments that are contrasted with that throughout the piece.
If you're just tuning in, I'm chatting with Kathleen Allan, artistic director and conductor of Canzona, who performed in the last Winnipeg Baroque Festival concert Saturday, joined by members of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. Kathleen, we've talked a lot about Bach, and we could keep going, but instead let's get to the other fella on the program, George Frederick Handel. You already mentioned a funeral anthem, right? Can you tell us more about this one?
That's right. So all the music on this program was actually written for funerals, probably, but it contains so much joy and gratitude. In Handel's case, this was his friend, his patron for many years, decades. Queen Caroline, she'd also come from German-speaking lands, like Handel had come to England. So they had that heritage in common and really found a kinship, I think, in his work in the court during her reign. So when she died, he wrote a massive work. The opening chorus is actually the source material that Mozart later stole for the opening of his Requiem, the Introit. So I think you'll hear that kind of somber melody in the orchestra and in the choir. And he really poured his heart and soul to this. It has, similar to the Bach, which has this spirit and body contrast, in the Handel we have this glory and regal qualities contrasted with her tenderness and her support for the poor and the people in her society that needed to be uplifted.
Yeah. She, consort George II, longtime patron of George Frederick Handel. And like you say, Handel knew these monarchs intimately, and he sort of works that into the music. But at the same time, almost unlike the Bach in the way, though, there's something more dramatic and something more regal and something more, I mean, this is the death of a monarch. This is a big deal. And there is that sort of melancholic spectacle that is evident in this music, right?
Yeah. And actually, I only realized this more recently since programming this, but when Queen Caroline died, they shut down everything.
Yeah, everything stopped.
The opera houses closed. And here I am thinking, like, we're just coming through this long period of artistic shutdown as well. And this piece was performed at her funeral, which would have been the first major orchestral work like this that had been heard for a couple months since she died. So it has this kind of coming back to life quality about it too, and this really important, it has a weight to it.
Yeah, there is a true gathering that would have taken place, and there will be a gathering that takes place to close out the Winnipeg Baroque Festival. One last word on this, Kathleen, because this is the last concert in the 2023 edition, the second iteration of the WBF. I asked John Weens when he was in last week about, what makes this doable in a market like Winnipeg? Why are we able to support and really become a sort of early music mecca? And he said it really comes down to the singing, the strong choral tradition that we have here. That's on full display through this week-long celebration of early music, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know any other city in the country that would have so many different choirs singing such a wide variety of music from the Baroque period. We have German, English, Italian last weekend with the Monteverdi. We'll have some William Byrd, I believe, with Proximus 5. And so it's really a testament to the choral singing tradition here, the knowledge, the appreciation of the public for this music, that they're willing to support an endeavor like this.
All the more reason to check it out. That's coming up Saturday to close out the WBF. Kathleen, as always, lovely seeing you.
Thanks so much.